types of petitions that get processed faster, consular processing times, and actually preparation of the petition. And I'm going to give you guys some tips on how to improve your processing times. And as you know, I try to do these lives weekly, even when I travel. And this week I'm traveling for a project due diligence. That's why our setting is a little more informal. I'm at the hotel right now. Okay, so let's dive right in. EB-5 processing times. This is something that clients ask me all the time because it makes a difference in how to plan for your life, for your work permits, for your travel. First, I would like to make it very clear that no matter who gives you what estimated time, if it's an attorney, if it's a former USCIS employee, if it's a former Department of State employee who is very experienced, all of these times are going to be estimates. Why? Because immigration specifically does not have any requirement or restriction on themselves to deliver their response in a specific time frame. So there are estimates that we are basing on what we're seeing in the market, what's been happening for the past year or two, some of the anticipated changes. However, USCIS simply doesn't have to respond to your petition. They don't have to adjudicate your petition within a specific time frame. And that's been one of the hardest parts, honestly, in working with the US immigration system is that sort of lack of predictability. So my first and foremost best advice, definitely try to find estimated processing times and try to make a plan, but make sure whatever plan you're making is flexible and you have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. So if my petition gets approved within this time frame, the actions that we plan to take, if that doesn't pan out, if my petition gets approved in a different time frame, what actions we plan to take, and so on. So that's my personal, kind of recommendation to you. So, but that being said, you also don't want to do no research on processing times and make a decision that we know is going to put you kind of at the back of the line. So, this is what we have been seeing in 2024 and 2025. And I anticipate these processing times are going to change or slow down. In 2024 and 25, we have been seeing that rural petitions were getting prioritized. So if you selected to invest in a rural project and filed your I-526 petition, the average processing time for those was about 6 to 8 months. Was that for everybody? No. I had a number of investors who got approved in just 3 months, and I had a number of investors who waited 12 to 15 months and they were in the same project, right? So that's another thing. Sometimes there are situations unique to your petition, or for some reason your petition gets assigned to adjudicator that for some reason takes more time. So the range was someone gets an approval in 3 months, someone gets an approval in 15 months, but they were pretty consistently averaging out between 6 and 8 months, which honestly was great when it comes to I-526 adjudication of petition, and that was for rural project. Now, what are my projections and anticipations now? First of all, we are in the middle of 2026. We're approaching a grandfathering deadline, so there's an increase in petitioners from all over the world, and we're also approaching a retrogression on the visa bulletin for Indian and Chinese nationals. So we also anticipate, there's also kind of an influx of petitioners who are trying to get into the system while the visa bulletins are still current. So a couple things are happening. You have a larger volume of petitions. So if you're speaking to an attorney and they're telling you, hey, we have been seeing 6 to 8 month processing times, or especially if you're speaking to regional centers, right? Because regional centers sometimes are a little overly optimistic about these processing times. If they're telling you we have been seeing 6 to 8 months processing times for rural, that is factually accurate. I just personally don't believe that's going to apply to people who are applying today, right? Because we know there's been a surge of volume of applications, which means USCIS needs more time to adjudicate. We also know that with this change of administration and the dodge efforts that were made last year, there were a very decent number of experienced IPO, so investor program office adjudicators, who left the office. So now there are fewer experienced adjudicators in that office this year than there were last year. Fewer experienced adjudicators means fewer petitions being adjudicated, right? And it's that simple. And we're already starting to see effects of it. For investors who filed their petitions in January of 2025 in rural projects, most of them have been approved by the end of 2025. At the same time, I'm looking at petitions for my investors who filed in the fall of 2025, and many of them are still waiting for adjudication, and it's been 9, 10 months. So we are starting to see the slowdown in the approvals and the adjudication, even for the I-5 to 6s filed in rural. And I think that's going to continue with the surge in the volume. What can you do? I mean, if you're working in your petition right now, it's July of 2026. If you can get that filed in the next few weeks before the mass filing of September, I would do it. So if you are kind of waiting, your petition is almost done, but you guys are just not rushing, and I'm seeing this with some investors, they're thinking, as long as I file it by September 30th, it's okay. There's going to be a big difference, most likely, in your processing time, whether you filed the last week of July or if you filed the last week of September. In prior years, so when we had a big deadline in 2019, what I observed is my investors who filed their petitions 2 months before the deadline versus those who filed in the last 2 weeks of the deadline, ultimately, their processing time difference was a year. So those who filed 2 months earlier got approved on average a year earlier than those who were at the end of that timeline. Because think about it, there are literally going to be probably a couple thousand petitions that will be filed in the months of August and September. So if you can be, like before those 2000, because they are allocated on a first come, first served basis, that could potentially save you up to a year of processing time. So that's on rural petitions. My best guess is if you're filing into a rural project today, I would anticipate a processing time of a year to 2 years. Um, you know, so depending how many petitions go in, it may even be a little bit longer, but probably for a lot of people, a year to 2 years. What may help? So investors who are Indian or Chinese probably will actually see longer processing times if the visa bulletin moves and retrogresses, because USCIS made it clear that they will be checking against the visa. So when they're going to be allocating petitions to adjudicators, they will check against the visa bulletin. And if they see that the person doesn't have a possibility of getting their immigrant visa soon, they will hold that petition and not adjudicate it. So, in practical sense, you can have an Indian and a Canadian investor file in a rural project and file their petitions in August of 2026. And 12 months from now, when those petitions are being assigned to adjudicators because they were filed at the same time, if if there's retrogression on the calendar, then the Canadian investor's petition is going to get assigned to adjudicator to be reviewed, and will get reviewed, in a year, in a couple of months. And the Indian investor's petition will not get assigned to adjudicator, because if they see that approving this petition in a year will still not allow this person to apply for a visa for another maybe a year and a half to 2 years from then they're going to hold that petition. So just keep that in mind as you're selecting, as you're selecting those projects. All right, what's next? That's for rural petitions. I've been getting a lot of questions. Where is the processing time difference between rural and if I choose an urban project? Honestly, guys, it is so hard for me to tell you now, but I would anticipate that whatever is going to happen with rural processing time adjudication, expect at least an extra year for your urban petition to be approved. So instead of going to a rural project, you go into urban. I would just say expect another year, right? So it is, it's definitely longer processing times, longer adjudication. USCIS has also made it clear that they don't plan to kind of change their ways. They plan to continue to prioritize rural petitions. What we have seen, so in 2024, we actually saw that the processing time gap between rural and urban started to shorten, right? We saw that urban petitions were taking about 9 months to review. I'm sorry, rural petitions were taking 9 months to review. Urban petitions were taking 14 months to review. So the average difference was about 9 months. But then what we saw in 2025, and of course we get this data a little bit delayed, we saw that they practically stopped adjudicating urban petitions, right? So just volume wise, they were not issuing adjudication. So rural petitions quickened, those were getting adjudicated in 6 to 8 months, and urban petitioners were waiting for 2+ years, right? And so that gap has widened. It's hard for me to say if if that overall difference is going to stay at a year or is going to grow even more. Because one of the things that I was disappointed to see is how few urban petitions have been approved and adjudicated overall. Again, the data is a little bit delayed, but some of the data we received in, towards the end of 2025, we saw that something like 90% or 85% of urban petitions that were filed in the last 3 years were still sitting unadjudicated, where on the rural side, more than 50% were adjudicated. So if you're choosing to go into an urban project, which many of you may choose because you like the quality of the project, because you're not subject to the visa backlog, so you're not relying on set aside visas, you can take a visa from an unreserved number. So, if you're not in a Indian Chinese expected retrogression pool, just keep in mind that the I-526 petition is probably going to take 2+ years to be adjudicated. Exactly how long, I don't know, but that's the expectation. Let's see. What can you do on faster urban adjudication? I'm not sure you can do much at this point. You can get some advice from litigation attorneys who do mandamus litigation specifically in the EB-5 space. There are a couple of firms that specialize in this, and they can probably give you feedback to see if the courts are helping them, because when the government is doing its job slowly, you can always file for a mandamus lawsuit to present your case to the judge and say this government entity is not doing their job, essentially. We have used mandamus litigation in the past when the adjudication of I-526 petitions was essentially stopped between 2019 and 22. It was extremely unnecessary and unfair and unproductive, in my personal opinion. And I have frankly had a number of judges who looked at the facts of the case, who looked at the government's arguments, and agreed with us. They were like, it was just unjustified. So mandamus lawsuits could be something that you could try to explore, but I think once your petition has been pending for about 2 years, that's when you can consider exploring a mandamus lawsuit. Okay. So, so let's kind of go through again and kind of revamp and processing times. If you're going into a rural petition, rural project, you're filing your I-526E, expect the processing time of probably a year plus if you're filing your petition in 2026. If you're going into an urban project, expect the processing time of 2+ years. How can you help it? How can you improve it? If you can file your case before September 30th, end of July, early August of 2026, I think it's going to mean months, if not a whole year of processing time advantage. Probably you will get approved and reviewed faster than the petitioners who are going to be filing their petitions at the end of September. Because again, there's going to be a few thousand petitions being filed in the month of August and September. So that's one way you can improve it. Having a clear petition, a clearly written one, also is going to help you. If you have a good charge, source of funds charge, if you have a clear narrative explaining exactly how you earned the funds, how you moved it, and it's all cross-referenced with your exhibits. So that's part of your attorney's job, but that's also part of your job as an investor to relay that information very clearly to your attorneys and support it. I find that well-structured and well-documented petitions do get adjudicated faster because the adjudicator can read and understand them better, right? So, and then, these are kind of on the processing times on the I-5 to 6 petitions. What are we seeing on the work authorization and travel authorization, which clients are receiving if they're choosing to do a concurrent adjustment? So those of you who are in the United States already on a non-immigrant status, you might be eligible to do a concurrent adjustment with your I-5 to 6 petition and eligible for an accompanying work and travel authorization. Again, we're seeing a huge slowdown under the current administration, under the prior administration, 2024, early 2025. We have seen the work permits being issued in as quickly as 1 month to on average 3 months after you filed your concurrent adjustment with the I-5 to 6. Those were great years, fast issuance of those two documents that are important. Today, we're starting to see that work and travel authorization is taking anywhere between 6 and 12 months after you file your petition. So be mentally prepared that you may be waiting for your new work authorization for 12 months. That is what we're seeing now. I think that's going to remain this slow for the foreseeable couple of years. And what can you do to affect it? There's really not much. I found in the past that even if you try to get letters of support for Congress from your employer, unfortunately those don't tend to consistently make a difference, but you can always make that effort. So again, I think filing sooner than later is your best bet. And last but not least, a lot of questions about how long does it take for removal of conditions, I-829 adjudication. It's been surprisingly better in the last few years. So in the prior years, we used to wait for the I-829 adjudication for, 3 to 4 years. So I'll give you a rundown of EB-5 history with processing times. When I started with this program, 2012 to about 2018, processing times and I-829 removal of conditions were about a year and a half. That was consistent. Then the Trump administration came in, change of administration directly at the IPO, processing times went to 4 years. To me, it's unacceptable. That's your government's job, is to go and actually check on the projects, make sure the jobs were created, and adjudicate petitioners' files if you're sitting on them for 4 years. Bank documents, employer documents, like businesses can be sold already 10 times in the next 4 years, and the original individuals who were creating the jobs, who completed the work, may not even be available anymore. So doing a site visit or doing a verification of I-829 documents 4 years after they were filed, to me, is very unreasonable. It doesn't help prevent fraud. It does not help prevent, bad business practices, and that is something that the government should be checking for. They should be reviewing that within a few months. But that was not the case. 2019 to about 2023, we saw the adjudication times for I-829s were 4 years. Now we're looking at 2024, 25, 26. We actually started seeing that newly filed I-829 petitions were getting adjudicated within a year. Once again, makes perfect sense. So change in the the change in the person who was heading the IPO department certainly helped to create that efficiency and speed. And so we've been seeing adjudication times for I-29s filed 23, 24, and 25 much shorter, right? So for newly filed I-29s, you may get your response as quickly as 6 months. Do we anticipate that that's possibly going to change? Maybe, but I think overall the department has gotten more efficient. So we're hoping that those processing times are going to continue to stay under a year. So right now, I still know investors who filed their I-29 removal of conditions in 2021, and those are still pending. And then I know investors who filed their removal of conditions in 2025, and they've been adjudicated. So we'll see. It's kind of all over the place. The one nice thing is when you file your I-29, you are getting a letter that extends the validity of your green card, so you're able to continue to use your permanent residency during that time of the adjudication. So, but the adjudication on the I-29s may lag for sure. All right, so we discussed I-5 to 6 processing times, work and travel authorizations, I-829s, and then last but not least, certainly and especially, what can you specifically as an investor do? I think having realistic expectations when you're working with your legal team. Number one, an average immigration attorney legal team, without necessarily dealing with an immense rush, will need between 6 to 12 weeks to work on your individual immigration documents to put together a quality file, because there's a few times it goes back and forth. You provide information, they have to review it, they have follow-up questions or things might be missing from those documents. They send you a second request, you provide that, they have to go through it again. So a law firm normally needs 6 to 12 weeks to put together a solid I-5 to 6 petition. In times like this, when there's a massive rush, they're already at capacity. So you have to take that into consideration. They may actually need more time. Other firms are able to expand their capacity during the deadline and shorten those time frames. But if you think that a law firm can put together a petition in 2 or 3 weeks, that is completely unrealistic, right? Has it been done in the past? Sure, I personally have done it a few times for individual investors where sort of everything was just aligned, and maybe it was one of the few cases we have worked on. But it is not very realistic for most law firms. So please don't put off hiring your immigration attorneys if you're trying to make it before September 30th deadline. So my recommendation is definitely, engage your counsel as soon as possible, and make sure that you're providing the documents to them as soon as possible, and adjust your expectations into how much time they need, which they do need multiple weeks. And also have a discussion with them when you're hiring them. If you're trying to make it by September 30th deadline, have an honest discussion about what their ability is, how much time they need, and when they need to receive all the documents from you. Take accountability of things you're providing to them. And also, please don't think that because you provided 9 out of 10 documents on the list, somehow they're able to do 90% of the work on your petition. That's not how it works. The missing document may be a component that connects all the other pieces of information, and they may not be able to do any work if you didn't provide the full asked list. So clients tend to do this a lot. They think, oh, I left out 1 or 2 documents that I'm gathering, but you can do the bulk of the work. That is just practically not how information interacts. Sometimes the missing piece is the one that's preventing us from being able to do the bulk of the work. And sometimes you do provide kind of a lot of the information so they're able to start working on it. But it's very, very hard from an attorney's perspective to work piecemeal on these documents. So, please be realistic with your immigration attorneys, communicate with them, communicate about timelines, and understand that normally they need 2 or more months for this process. So they're trying to accommodate you in less than 2 months. You need to be super efficient and help them It's like help them, help you. So that's one of the ways you can definitely affect and help your petition. Try to get it filed before September 30th, like end of July, early August. If you cannot make that, make sure, as you're starting now, you provide efficient documents to your clients. And let's see, last but not least, check in if your petitions have been pending more than kind of average rural versus city time. Check in with a mandamus lawsuit attorney and see if that can be helped by filing a mandamus action. So sometimes it is helpful, and that environment tends to change. And you know, set your own expectations, life expectations to plan A, plan B, and plan C for sure. And what I have seen, though, I have been working in this industry, like I said, since 2012. So almost, going on 15 years. I've seen processing times fluctuate. At the end of the day, things get done. Sometimes waiting is very frustrating, but that's a general immigration process. I've had investors who expected to get their green cards in a year and a half. They ended up waiting for 4. Some investors who expected the 3-year turnaround time and got their green cards in 1. It does fluctuate. We cannot predict exactly what's going to happen to your petition. So being mentally flexible and not creating any very, very strong plans that could negatively impact you if the processing times change is very important. Just remember, these are estimates. But at the end of the day, when people get their green cards, the result is the same. Everybody's happy, and they're happy that they went through this process. Also, putting off EB-5, again, over my almost 15 years with this industry, I have heard it so many times from my investors. I wish I would have done it earlier. I've been looking at this program for years. I just kind of thought I had time. I wish I would have done it earlier, because they see that their friends who pulled the trigger on the process earlier, they already are further along in the process, have their green cards, are on the way to their citizenship, while they're still, years in anticipation. So putting off this process generally, obviously, if you don't start, you're not going to get to the finish line. So I generally don't think putting off the process makes sense if you think processing times are going to get better. Even if they are, generally the petitioners who filed earlier are going to get approved earlier. So that would be kind of my recommendation if you're ready. The only reason to put off the process is to get ready financially, get your affairs in order to make sure you can afford to have that money in a locked up, illiquid position. But if you're ready and you're just kind of mentally thinking, I have time, I generally find that does not. I've yet to see one investor who came to me and said, I'm glad I waited, although I was ready to invest a few years ago. Right. So that would be my recommendation. Expect fluctuating processing times, but at the end of the day, in my years with this program, the one thing that keeps me staying and working and enjoying for most of the time, enjoying this work, is actually seeing the results. At the end of the day, we do see the results, the approvals, and families gaining permanent status in the United States and being able to, to work, live, travel, and really contribute to their own lives as well as to their communities. So I hope today's session was helpful, gives you a little bit of a better idea on processing times. And of course, I always say this, and we have our disclaimer, nothing I'm telling you in these sessions is giving you legal advice or financial advice. I'm giving you general information that may or may not be applicable to your case. The only way to know is you can take this information and use it to ask questions from your immigration attorneys who know your individual set of facts, and as well as your, FINRA licensed brokers that are helping you select the project. You also want to check with a broker. That's what I do today. But if you're discussing which project to select, rural, urban, infrastructure, what are the processing times, again, check in with your licensed professional that you're working to make sure they know your set of facts and can set some expectations for you. All right. Good luck. And if you guys ever have questions or you need project selection services, please feel free to reach out. And if you have future topics for lives that you want to explore, please send us a comment or comment under this video. Thank you.